Stand by for broadcast.
You're listening to Inside Air, a behind-the-wire view of the Royal Air Force, its people, technology and operations.
Hello, I'm Squadron Leader Peter Lisney, and in this episode, time's up for RAF branches and trades. We reveal their replacement. We'll also reheat a few stories, just in case you missed them. But first, see if you can identify this noise. Find out if you're right at the end of this episode. Now, for more than half its existence, the RAF has organised its officers into branches and enlisted personnel into trades. But it's been decided that a new approach is needed for the Next Generation RAF. I spoke with Group Captain Nick Britton, who's been heading up the team responsible for designing the replacement, Professions.
And in our future, the competency record that each service person has will be as important to them as their pay record. But I do want to inform not just future service personnel, current service personnel, but former service personnel as well. Program Professions is more about this cultural change. It's more about understanding how we resize ourselves to the 2040 Next Gen Air Force. It's not about having to save a single penny.
Group Captain Britton, Professions, this is something that's just coming about now. We're looking at replacing the structure that currently is trades and branches. Before we get into this, can you give us a little bit of a history lesson? Tell us what the situation is now and where did it come from?
Yeah, so you're quite right. We currently have, depending on how you count it, somewhere around 68 branches and trade groups. So the officers are in their branches and our enlisted personnel, our other ranks, are in the trade groups that go from trade group number 1 to trade group 21. But that isn't the way it has to always be, and is actually now perhaps acting to some extent as a stovepipe on our agility. We're going to have to remember, this structure came to us in 1951. It was a Sholto Douglas review of 46 to 51, which was looking to right-size the Air Force after the Second World War, bring us down from over 1 million service personnel under arms to what they thought they needed in the 1950s. But it hasn't really changed since then. So there's been the odd amalgamation of the trade groups, and TGs 2 and 3 went into the TG1 amalgamation. Recently, we've just looked at Scopies and FOAs, TGs 9s and 12s, going to TG7. But in essence, the thing that we have now with their officers and their branches, the enlisted personnel and their trade groups, is what they designed in 1951 for that Air Force, for that society, for that size of Air Force. Back then, we were big in comparison to now. We were hundreds of thousands strong. We were doing national service. We had 30-odd thousand a year join the service each year. We needed something suitable for mass, rigid, simple, that everyone could understand, and was great for that society. But we're no longer a large Air Force. We're a small Air Force. We need to be nimble. In essence, we need to be agile and flexible about how we use our personnel. And hence, as you say, this journey we're on to move away from those 68 branches and trade groups into 11 new professions.
So this isn't about name change, is it? This is about structure as well. Is that? Am I right?
Oh yes. I think it would be such a mistake to view this as a name change only exercise. Not only am I with my teams moving our 68 branches and trade groups into these 11 new professions, if you like, making bigger professions, but I'm baking in the workforce agility and flexibility by allowing our service personnel to serve in the broadest range of roles within their profession, depending on their aptitude and the service need. And I'm not just making bigger blobs of trade groups, because that in itself, of course, wouldn't give you agility and flexibility. There are 3 other things, Peter, we have to do at the same time to actually deliver this. And the first of those is get after our HR processes. And by that, I mean everything from how we recruit, what it says on our recruiting websites, through to the documentation they sign off when they join the service, the 08s and 75s, if you reflect back on your own journey. Then the career pathways they're going to go through, the QRs that they serve under, the APs that describe those career pathways. All of this HR systems have to be reformed as well. And I have Air Commodore Burns as my 1-star lead. And moreover, if we're after agility and flexibility, we're going to have to really get after training, because our current training acts, if you like, in many ways as a barrier to agility and flexibility. We front load training. At phase two, it's long, and in many ways, it's just in case training at phase two rather than just in time. I've got to get after what really needs to be done at phase two and what can be done later on at phase three training, so that the training itself is not the barrier to moving people around the service. Instead, the training could perhaps be done at the workplace. It could be done just in time rather than just in case. And then, thirdly, and this is why it's not a name change, perhaps the biggest cultural change for us is we can no longer in our future have these trade groups that are almost viewed by the service as homogeneous, that everyone in that trade group is exactly the same. Instead, when we don't have trade groups, we're going to have to look at our service personnel as individuals, individuals with competencies. What can that individual service person do versus what that one over there can do, and manage them by those competencies. And in our future, the competency record that each service person has will be as important to them as their pay record.
So something that I guess a lot of listeners will have experienced is that thought when they're looking at their career and their aspirations going forward, is the in trade or in branch and out of trade, out of branch postings.
Yeah.
And what impact those out of trade postings will have on their career. Has that been thought about?
Yeah, absolutely. So we find when we talk to our recruiting organization that they've already moved towards the professions on our SharePoint site, on our websites that they recruit from, and that's being formalized in the next rollout. And that the professions and the very flexibility that that profession has, the options that they have, is much more attractive for our next generation of service personnel. They wish to experience more things. They don't want to be stovepiped. And that very broadness of employment is an attractive feature for us. Indeed, one of the benefits that my program is seeking to deliver. So we find that people want it. Similarly, right now, in our officer game, not so much in the enlisted personnel, we already have officers with broad experience. I mean, I myself am what's called now the people ops profession, or in the old speak for some of your listeners, admin sec. If they can remember,
that was me. I joined as admin
there's
sec.
nothing wrong with admin sec. I mean, that then became per support. But in that branch in the old speak that I joined up in, and I've served some 29 years now, I often brief on professions that I've spent half of my time outside of my nominated profession. So I haven't been doing jobs that were tagged as being suitable for admin sec. So my career, just like it has been for many officers, has been very broad. And I'm offering that now to our enlisted personnel as well. So whilst I don't want to make this all about me, I've been a lieutenant colonel in the Syrian army. I've done Sunni extremist ops. The whole range and gamut of both operational and staff activity and command activity has not been, if you like, stovepiped by my branch. So why can't we have that same flexibility on offer for those of our enlisted personnel who wish to and show the aptitude to deliver on that?
So let's look at an example. Let's say we've got a junior NCO avionics technician who has been offered or pinged to go to a careers office on their next tour, possibly on promotion. What would you say is the attitude at the moment for the benefit of those listeners that are not currently serving? And how will that change? How should someone think if they get that posted in the future?
Yeah. So in our past, taking an AFCO, and that's a good example of an any, as they called it, any post, any trade, any branch, any profession in the newspeak can go and do that. We're taking that and extending it. So think of this avionics corporal who, I don't know, is serving at Lossiemouth very happily. But we need to move people around and people are shuffled around the service. He wants to stay on at Lossiemouth. Now, what else could I have him do at Lossiemouth that would be rewarding for him and for the service? Can I then, with that agile employment and the right training, move him into another side of the engineering profession that serves at Lossiemouth as well, and give him more options? Similarly, just like now, we are going to have some of our personnel become deep subject matter experts, and they'll be choosing their career path, and we as career management will be helping them on that career path. Some need to become really, really specialized, and others don't need to be so specialized. And we will manage that career pathway for each individual, looking at them as individuals with the competencies or skills, if you like, that they have acquired or have been trained into over their service career. And it will be the same balance we have now. Some need to be general, some are going to choose to be specialized, and we, the service, need both the specialist and the generalist to deliver on our operational output.
So do you think this will support the Chief of the Air Staff's aspiration for the opportunity to have zigzag careers, to spend a number of years in the service and then perhaps go into civilian employment, maybe with British Aerospace for a number of years, and then come back on promotion, fulfilling a deep tech role?
Yeah, I think why we were so fixed on the competencies and getting a decent set of competencies to describe our job is we want them externally facing. So, if it is engineering, why have we currently got only internally facing competencies that British Aerospace don't understand what that means? Why aren't we following industry standards on our competencies so that very journey you speak of, the zigzag, the experiencing things outside, or even lateral entry or rejoiners, that whole process would be easier if we spoke in the same language of competencies? Rather than how when you come to the happy day of leaving the service, you get a valedictory letter, a VL they call it, signed off, well, not quite signed off. It's got a photostat of the Chief of Defence Staff signature, but it looks a bit like his signature. And at the back, it has a meaningless list of the current competencies and qualifications we have in the service. It means nothing to the individual who can't remember what they were, and it means nothing to the next employer. Why can't
That's very true. So I left commission. I was on a short service commission, left in 1996. So that goes back a while.
I'd already been in for years, Billy.
Yeah,
Naffy door's still swinging, mate. The ink's still wet.
So when I left, I had to write a CV, and I had to translate everything that I'd done in the service into civvy speak. Yep. So you're saying that now we're going to speak in civilian language?
If I can get this perfectly done, and of course, we've got to remember this is a journey. There are hundreds and hundreds of competencies that we need to do this for. We need to understand the levels. We understand what we're looking at. Which outside organization should we look at? The one that came up on my office today, for example, was RICS. RICS do Chartered Institute, and they do surveying and infrastructure. So why can't our competencies around infrastructure match exactly RICS? Exactly. And then you won't need to do translation. It'll be an easier move for all of us come that day when we want them to leave. We, after all, need our service personnel to leave and leave well. The perfect journey for us is we have, 20 years of their time, and then they get a much better job outside. And they tell their peer group, it's been fantastic in the Air Force. And when I came to leave, I could walk into a job paying me all of this because of what the Air Force did for me. Would then be a positive journey for all members of society. And I have no problem in viewing our service as having a sort of training obligation as well as the operational obligation. We are a force for good in many ways, societal as well as operational, taking our young men and women from whatever background, giving them training and experience to enable them to get better jobs outside in the UK, broader UK environment. That would be a success story for every person. And I think a success story for the RAF.
Now, just to look at one of my first impressions of when I saw the 11 professions cut down from 68, and knee-jerk reaction. Well, in fact, you tell me. You've been on the road. You've been speaking to a lot of personnel around the Air Force. What is their knee-jerk reaction when you say down from 68 to 11?
So it is,
honestly,
yeah, of course. It's nuanced, I suppose, would be. I'm seeing the same thing in other parts of the ship, and let me explain that. Some of the professions are obvious in many ways. I say logistics, and they say, "Yep, that's us," and I say engineering, and they say, "Yep, that's us." Some of my professions, in fact, let's be honest, the security and resilience profession, they don't say, "Yep, that's us." They say, "Hang on, how's that going to work?" And I have therefore deliberately placed that at the back end of my targeted graduation dates for these professions to give more time to understand, have we got that grouping right? How would it operate? What would it do? And we've also seen the same thing for our civilian future members to join the service. I was talking to the Group Captain Lizzie Nichol and her work on recruitment and selection. Their websites, we're seeing that if we say engineering or logistics, everyone says, "Hey." If I say security and resilience, no one wants to go further on our website to find out what that means. And I am painfully aware that I may have got the groupings of security and resilience wrong, and I may have got the title wrong. And that doesn't mean I'm not so fixed in my ways that I won't accept we may have made a mistake. And therefore, Nothing has been lost. Nothing has been broken. It's a nice, safe transition we're going through, taking ourselves time, years to plan this, years to plan it, and years to execute it. And if I have to change the plans we go through, recognizing there's a strong governance structure behind that, I can't just do it myself. I'd have to go back to my 3-star chair program board. We'd have to go to the exco. We'd have to seek approval and authority as to why we want to do it. But change is still possible if I have made a mistake somewhere along the line. But 9 out of the 11 land really well. Security and resilience, it doesn't land quite so well yet. It is a complex piece. It's the profession where I was really seeking to be the most adventurous, to say, not just, yes, you're all logistics, let's find out a way of making more agile and flexible. What I was offering in that profession was, what could we be like in 20 years from now? It's difficult to think in any terms in the Air Force without the current trade groups. They're so strong, there's such a strong branding, the current trade group. So I said 20 years from now, how will we be delivering the force protection? How will the police function look in 20 years from now? Will it still look like this? I was trying to offer them an opportunity, not just to reshuffle the jigsaw pieces, but to actually break open each jigsaw piece and see if we can find a new way of structuring, of doing our organizational design to deliver the output for the 2040 Next Gen Air Force.
It's interesting because the security and resilience ops, the trades and branches that go in there, provost and security,
Yep.
Which are our police, RAF police, regiment, and PERS training.
Yep. And you haven't read the whole list, have you? And the PTIs,
and the PTIs,
and the firefighters.
Yeah. And the firefighters, yeah. So there's a lot there. Okay.
If I could, forgive me, Peter, if I leap straight in. I know it's rather rude because it's your interview, not mine. But if I could leap
That's
straight
all right.
back in.
You take over.
So what I was hoping to see was that let me start there. I gave 5 definitions to DCOMCAP about what makes a good profession. Is it how they operate? Is it the environment they operate in? Is it about the skills and aptitudes required when we recruit them? So a similar level of that. Is it about the training they require? Or is it, in the 5th one that he went for, as the answer about what makes inherently a good profession, is the one with the greatest innate agility and flexibility that we can have within that profession, i.e., how mobile can our people be around that profession to deliver on this flexibility I keep speaking of? And yeah, that's why I thought there were a possibility to have connections between these people who are in the firefighters, the PTIs, they're going to be out doing things. Their backgrounds are going to be. So I argue there was a case there, but there are other arguments that can be made and are being made about is that right? And I stress we are not one of those programs that says there's only one answer and that's it. And everyone else, whatever you say, whatever else you come up with, we're going to ignore you. We are not in that program. Let me make that further. Our whole design of our program wasn't imposed by me on the service. It wasn't me and DCOMCAB saying, right, we started this by asking thousands of service personnel through 2 exercises we did on personas and blueprints, which I can talk to you later on if you like. But we asked a lot of people, what is it you love about the service? What is it you hate about the service? So I can understand what they wanted, if you like, without wishing to over-egg the nomenclature of all this, human-centric design. What did we, the people in the service, want it to be like? And that's where we got after agility and flexibility, because we noted our younger personnel wanted to have these experiences. They wanted to be able to do different things in their time in the service and not be stovepiped. And they wanted a broad range that they could do within their profession.
It's a good point, because if you're in a trade or branch currently that is undersubscribed, i.e., there's a workforce shortage, you could find yourself continually doing the same role that you don't want to do, and you could go for a commission, or you could go for PVR, to leave the Air Force if you wanted to.
Let me just stress on that. I mean, one of our evidential base talks about the next generation seeking to have more working careers in their working career, if that makes sense. So rather than join and do 35 years as I'm going to be doing in the RAF, they want to have different experiences. 6 is a magic number. 6 careers in their entire working career. Now, why can't we have more of those careers within the RAF? Someone wakes up one day and says, I've really had enough of doing this. Currently, their option is PVR. there's a simple, there's a clunky way of remustering, but it's really quite tricky. I'm now going to give them another ability to, if the service need exists, always the service need. I mean, we're not a charity, we're doing this for a purpose. But if the service need exists and they have the aptitude, why are we not allowing them to make that choice to say, I want a second career within the service?
We better just clarify what PVR means. What's the acronym?
Well, some say it stands for Port, Vodka, and Red Bull, which is a disastrous drink I've never tried myself, but I know others say it stands for Premature Voluntary Release. And it's another phrase, a bit like ET, early termination.
You've mentioned Next Gen Air Force. How do we define that?
Yeah, we struggled with that as well. What precisely did we mean by this Next Gen Air Force? I understand the broad intent. I can see what the chief is getting at, and by God, is he right. But what's that mean for engineering? Or what's that mean for logistics? And if we're doing the organizational design of the Royal Air Force, this restructuring, surely we should know our aiming point. What is 2040? What's it going to look like? So we didn't shy away from it. Instead, I came up with the concept that we need a blueprint for each of these professions describing what they're going to be doing in 2040. Now, if they all had the same template to complete that blueprint, we'd then have 11 nice, identical templates for each of the blueprints. And if they did that for the 2040, they could do it at 2030 against the same template to describe their journey towards this 2040. And those 11 could then be amalgamated into, if that's a word, I think amalgam's a word. I've been using it a lot, so I hope we can use an amalgamation of those 11 blueprints into the RAF blueprint. And we could take that back to the chief and say, Chief, are we hitting the spot? Do we need to check and adjust that we've got this blueprint to define where you thought we'd be in 2040? And that was going to be very powerful, I thought. And I debated, what should this template look like? What sort of things should it have on it? What sort of field does it need for 2040? And rather than just come up with it myself and impose it, you heard me speak earlier about the fact that I want this to be a human-centric design. I asked 1,000 service personnel a series of open questions, not closed, not quantitative, but open qualitative questions about what do they think the future is going to hold? What are we going to be doing in 2040? What structures are going to be in place in order to build up that template? And it was a long-winded process, but it was remarkably easy once I reviewed their answers to see where the thematics of all this, the themes that were coming in about what our future could or should be, what we are aspiring to be. And I've also tried to use those blueprints to tie in the other change programs that are going through the Air Force right now. So my favorite one, the one that I think is really fantastic of the chief, is net zero in carbon terms, net zero by 2040. The first Air Force to become
it's
net
remarkable.
zero. It's brilliant. But where is that then in the engineering blueprint? I should be able to see what they're going to have to do to deliver on net zero. And that's just one of the many change programs going through PARMIS. And once we've gone through that work, we then did the template. I gave it to my program board, the heads of professions and DCOMCAP in October of last year. They're working up those blueprints right now. The new DCOMCAP, Air Marshal Knighton, is going to go and review with each head of profession. And then on the 15th of September, chosen because it's Eagle Tag Day, on the 15th of September, we're having another session where all the heads of professions are going to be in to go and explain their blueprints, make sure we've got alignments, make sure we understand who's doing what, that nothing's been forgotten, that we have a coherent view of our future. And I think that'll be a very powerful document, which in due course, once I've gone through the approvals process of DCOMCAP, the Chief of the Air Staff, I will be seeking to publish to each member of our society, of our service, so they can see them for themselves where our blueprint is taking us. And that won't be a one-hit weapon. It'll be iterative. So as things change and adjust, we'll be changing and adjusting the blueprint as we aim towards this next gen, but we'll have next gen Air Force of 2040. But we'll have a clearer aiming point. We'll understand what we're trying to get to, the head mark, if you'll forgive Royal Navy terminology.
I imagine that destination's always going to change because every 5 years, 10 years, we look at this and then we've realised that we're off alignment, slightly need to reset our navigation point and adjust accordingly. So yeah, constant change, but constant improvement.
I agree. And published. It should now be an open document for our personnel. Every member of that profession should be able to pick it up if they're well crafted. And the chief was when we were going through these with the first versions of these with the chief, he said that's not ambitious enough. I don't like what that's doing. I don't agree with that. It needs to be talking more about that. And it was fantastic. watching the chief with all of his wisdom saying, no, 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 you're missing the point. We need to do this, this, and this. And then that gave us, I don't know, names, no pack drill as to which profession it was, but it gave us a much better product. One that I think when we do publish this, our populations, our service personnel will say, yep, that's exactly what I want to be part of. That is my Air Force, not this one of the past, but this one that the chief is telling me about, this thing of the next gen Air Force that's explained to me in my blueprint. I want to be part of that. And that's what we're trying to get to, Peter.
Let's talk about competencies. Will aviators start collecting competencies to better their position when it comes to promotion boards?
Yeah. So we must understand that competencies are not new to the service. We've been doing this in various parts to various levels across. What's new for us is we're going to make it across the service. We're going to really drive it. But other people have been already using competencies successfully. Generally, of course, competencies are achieved in one of three ways. You can do a course, so a particular course can give you that competency. You can acquire a competency by doing a role. So if you do the role successfully, then depending on what that role's competencies were, if you have done that role well for the reporting period, we will acquire. So the system will automatically give you those competencies. And then there's what they laughingly call the one-hit wonder, which is where you have something specific about your skill set, and via an arbitration system we already have in place, we can then say, yes, you're right, you do have these competencies at this level, and then give them. And our service personnel will then need to, as I mentioned earlier, view their competency record as important to them as their pay record, because you're quite right. Competencies are used to select for promotion and select for position. That's what we do. Now, the promotion selection has other things that go with it, promotion boards and the whole, but how you maximize your chances of getting the posting you want or the promotion you want is by having those competencies. And in our new world order, our service personnel will have the ability to view, both on their phone is the ambition, both what their competencies are, and more importantly, as they look to manage their careers and where they'd like to be, what else do they need to get to the next posting, to get to the next job? What else do they have to have, and how can they go about acquiring that? And we're working out on with my next hat on as the boss of career management. We're working now on the software to enable that to happen, so more people can look at those competencies.
So the app will tell you what you're deficient in and tell you how to go about.
So matching, yeah. How do we match? They have a very advanced terminology which I'd like to share with the audience. They describe it as eggs and egg cups. So each egg cup is the posting. Each individual is an egg, and how do we match the egg to the egg cup? And that's how they describe it. Currently, of course, that's a bit of a black art, and now I want to make it more open and transparent. We know what the egg cup requires. We know what the eggs are. So now we can match eggs to egg cups. Always, of course, about the service need, matched where we can with the needs of the individual. But the service need will always, as it always has been, as all of your audience will know, the service need comes first. People join a trade group in their past. It mattered. You were TG1, and that was something special. And I don't want them to be concerned out there that we're somehow losing something. We're doing something differently, but it will be as good. But I do want to inform not just future service personnel, current service personnel, but former service personnel as well.
That's a really good point, because we do have a lot of listeners that are former serving people, and potentially it'd be rather sad to hear that their trade group has been absorbed into a wider profession. But it's good news for those that are serving.
I mean, I carry that as one of my risks. The cultural change I'm doing for the service. Now, we've talked about the positive cultural change, the idea of looking at people as people and trying to understand what people need and what we need, and balancing the service need and the person. But that's a great cultural change. But I'm also worried, and I've been talking to others in DCDC, Defense Concepts and Doctrine Center.
It's Shrivenham, yes.
About this very culture of the Royal Air Force. You may have seen some of the work that's been going on by others about our current culture, to understand what the services culture is, and alongside that, what the trade group culture is, and the affinity. We did a survey of all service personnel currently in the Royal Air Force. What's your cultural affinity to? Is it to your station? Is it to your profession? Is it trade group? What is it that we're tying? Because we need to understand what's happening in the engineering community. When I move away from the TG1s, TG5s, TG13s, TG40s, when I move away from that into this engineering profession, that's 9,500 service personnel. That's a tricky thing to have an organic culture to.
That's a big tribe.
It's a big tribe. And do I need to have, within the specializations that may or may not exist in the future, do I need to talk about badges, and do I need to talk about stuff? Because some of our current trade groups have badges and some don't. And that seems a bit odd. So there's further work yet to be done to understand what badges we need. My own personal view, and this is just me, Peter, I think I want a badge for the specialization in the profession. I want it to be a
As
visible marker.
as the United States military do.
Yeah. So there's plenty of work going on from the Warrant Officer of the Royal Air Force about our future uniform policy. I don't know if you've had him on the show yet, but he can talk to you about uniforms and what those badges could be as we try and build those new associations for our future, a new cultural hook that our service personnel can engage into.
What I'm going to do now is have a look at some of the questions that I've heard, and I'm referring to the rumours and facts document, which I've seen. And you know what? Just again to compliment you here, you've been upfront with the negative stuff, the potentially the big questions. So let's just have a quick pounce around these rumours. So rumour number one, the move from trades and branches to professions is just a cost-cutting exercise. What do you have to say about that?
I am so pleased that my mandate, because of course this is not this is a mandate, a program, PDG, Portfolio Development Group. This is a formal change program for the Royal Air Force. It therefore needs a mandate. The mandate is personally signed by the Chief of the Air Staff directly to me, ordering me to do this. And in this mandate, it is clear we are not saving any money. I'm not like many other change programs that have to save money. Program Professions is more about this cultural change. It's more about understanding how we resize ourselves to the 2040 Next Gen Air Force. It's not about having to save a single penny.
Okay, moving on from there, will it cost our aviators? Will it affect their pay?
Okay, the pay is interesting. No, I am not aspiring to do anything in pay, but we recognize as people move around, as they're agile and flexibly employed within their profession, some of our professions may have specializations that link to different parts of our pay structure. You may recall in Pay 16 that we had something back then called a trade supplement placement. It placed some of our aviators in SUP 1 and some of our aviators in SUP 3 or SUP 4, and that SUP 4 was paid slightly more than SUP 1. It's not a lot more. We called it back then, when I was part of the program that delivered it, we called it the rugby ball of differentiation, because we had we paid all the junior personnel the same, and we paid all the warrant officers the same. But in between, for our listed personnel, we had a small degree of variation as we did that work on pay 16. And when I move personnel around, I am working with AFREM staffs now, that's Armed Forces Remuneration on the 6th floor of the MOD, about how we'll make sure that no one, when they're told to move to a different part of a profession that may attract a lower supplement, if they've come from a higher supplement, they will not be disadvantaged. So already working on that. But what I would say to anyone who's listening to us, I'm not sure how many people are listening to, but let's hope there's thousands. What I would say is it's about something called the Hawthorne-Thwaite Review of Armed Forces Incentivization. So there is a program being done now, an independent program being done now, to look at how we incentivize people to serve and remain in the RAF, or in fact, it's MOD-wide. And that may come up with a different approach. I don't want to prejudge what Mr. Hawthorne-Thwaite wants to come out with, but sometime later there will be another view about how we do our incentivization. And I think that could be a step change in how we incentivize in terms of money our personnel.
But for the time being, someone who is in a particular trade where they are earning a bit more than someone they went through training with, this will not affect that pay. Is that what you're saying?
That's not what we're trying to do. So I'm trying to use the existing systems laid down by AFRM with those 4 supplements. As I move people around, I would retain them at what we paid them when we were at the higher level. So, and also, I think we ought to make it very clear, we're being agile and flexible, but how agile and how flexible depends on the service need. So it won't be, I occasionally find myself, now I know your generation, I'll use a joke for you. I'm not making the Mr. Ben Air Force, where today I'm a firefighter and tomorrow I'm a fighter pilot. We're not that agile and we're not that flexible, but we're expanding the agility and flexibility so that we can use our workforce, our service personnel, in the way we need to. currently we can't use our personnel in the way we need to. And that's what we're going to get to. But I'm not anticipating thousands and thousands of people trying to move all the time across the Air Force, because the service need doesn't have that.
So if we've got an aviator who is listening to this, has heard this and is still thinking, nah, don't like this, has read all the documentation and thinking, don't like this, this is not right. What are the options open to that person?
Right. And now, if you'll forgive me, I'll do a sort of politician answer. So what I'll be urging that person to do is engage with the professionals advisor team, and all of this information is on our SharePoint site about how you engage with the professional advisor team, so that their concerns can be explained and they can be answered. They can engage directly with my team. And we have taken many. And every time anyone writes a comment on any of our products that you've been so kind to praise earlier, we respond to every single comment. We let no one left hanging. We answer everything. So I'm hoping that there won't be people who feel this is a negative journey. However, perhaps to the crux of your question, there will need to be, for those professions where there is a change to the employment expectation, and forgive me sounding almost legalese in this, but where we've changed their employment expectation, the current policy requires us to ask them an invitation to transfer about whether they transfer to where we are or do they stay on what would now be an old trade group. And we won't force anyone, but I'm hoping that this journey can be so exciting, so well structured, such a nice rallying call about how our future is going to work, that very few of our personnel will be saying, oh, I don't want to come across, I want to stay on my old trade group thing. But I fully recognize that we employed them on that trade group. We have given them a legitimate employment expectation, and we will honor that. We're not in the business of breaking our own policy about how we manage our service personnel when changes like this happen. This is not our first change, not our first rodeo. We will follow the policies we already have in place. I do accept we're doing it on scale now. We're doing it en masse, but we will follow the policy.
Okay. Well, Group Captain Britton, just to wrap it up, what's your hopes? I believe you've said you're posted now. You're off to a new role. This is your baby, isn't it? 5 years' time. How is it going to be?
So much am I wedded to what I'm doing that I asked my bosses whether I could take the senior responsible owner, the SRO role, with me into my new role. So yes, I'm being posted on from the team leader role, and the next group captain will replace me at the beginning of August. But I'm taking the SRO with me because I am so wedded to what we're doing. I don't want to let anyone else touch it. This is, as you say, my baby, and I'm not letting it go. And when I talk of the risks as Chief of the Air Staff that we have in this program, one of those risks is that career management by competence I speak of doesn't actually match my intent. So I'm pleased that my next job as the boss of career management, as ACOS CM, that I will have the professions team working directly for me again, tied in with career management to make sure I can deliver what has become to me so vitally important.
I like the sound of that. So you've let's be just be Pete here. You're setting up the situation. Some people get posted a long ways away and don't have to deal with the consequences. You are throwing yourself into the consequences of this system that you and your colleagues have come up with.
I and I must stress, my team around me that are helping me deliver this are equally wedded to the importance of this program. We are a team of believers, and believing in the ideas and aspirations. I stress we are open to challenge. If someone gives us more information, we will change, and we keep changing. But those fundamentals about agility and flexibility, fundamental about career management by competency, not about the label of trade group, those are, I think, our clear future on how we deliver in the Chief of the Air Staff's intent for a next generation Air Force, the 2040 Air Force. This is how we get after it in the space.
Group Captain Britton, illuminating, very interesting, and it's all our futures. Thank you very much.
No, Peter, thank you, and thank you for your audience. Thank you very much.
This is Reheat for Inside Air. I'm AS1 Victoria Andrews. The Joint Helicopter Support Squadron have marked their 40th anniversary. Born out of the Falkland Islands conflict, the squadron have provided crucial battlefield helicopter support to every rotary wing operation since. Joint Helicopter Support Squadron delivers and sustains the specialist helicopter handling and underslung capabilities for operations and exercises worldwide, while also providing support to diverse humanitarian activities. The squadron also supports exercises with Joint Helicopter Command, NATO and Joint Expeditionary Forces. A Royal Air Force Voyager has conducted a major air-to-air refuelling exercise with Qatar Emiri Air Force Rafale fast jets. Speaking of exercise Soaring Falcon, XO of No. 10 Squadron Leader Harvey, said how integrated activities such as these not only provide the opportunity to enhance our skills and help develop bilateral air-to-air refuelling expertise with our partner, moreover, they demonstrate the capability and reach available when we work together. The RAF has hosted the annual Air Combat Power Visit for all UK and international students on the Advanced Command and Staff course. The visit allowed these military leaders to see how the RAF delivers air power in a coordinated, integrated and effective manner alongside international allies and partners. And finally, the standard of climbing in the RAF is higher than ever. That's according to Corporal Samuel Fillington Doyle. The sport has grown massively in popularity since the 2020 Olympics, and the Air Force is reaping the benefits. The RAF Indoor Climbing Championships took place in Sheffield recently, where the team for the upcoming season was selected, and a new generation of climbers were inspired to pursue the sport. That's Reheat on Inside Air.
I'm SAC's Simon Ross with this episode's Name That Noise. That was the sound of a parachutist practicing drills in a set of flight swings. In the Airborne Delivery Wing main hangar at RAF Brize Norton, you will find the flight swings which are used for training on the low-level parachute. The parachutist is fitted into them just like a parachute harness. Then they can practice the drills required for their descent in a safe environment. The Airborne Delivery Wing was established in 1940 at RAF Ringway. Accolades include supporting Operation Market Garden in 1944 and 3 Para during the Suez Crisis in 1956. Since moving to RAF Brize Norton in 1976, the Airborne Delivery Wing now provides parachute training for all UK airborne forces. This also includes the RAF Falcons, the UK's premier military parachute display team.
That's all for this episode of Inside Air. Please give us a review and subscribe on your favourite podcast app, and join us again soon.
You've been listening to Inside Air, a behind-the-wire view of the Royal Air Force, its people, technology and operations. If you're serving in the RAF and have a story for us, please speak to your unit media and communications officer. Inside Air is written and produced for the Royal Air Force by RAF Media Reserves.